Welcome back to My Hero What If. Today we'll be doing What If Deku had Godzilla's powers. Now, our story starts 200 to 300 years ago, when quirks were finally coming about. The UN, if you don't know, the United Nations of the world, they had decided that Godzilla, they were unable to control him, because he changes from moods every so often, and could destroy part of the planet, or even destroy all of humanity. So with quirks coming around, they decided to finally exterminate Godzilla. Now there was a gigantic battle, but Godzilla was finally defeated. But they had philosophized a gigantic explosion would happen once they've killed Godzilla. One of the people in the expedition had a metal bending quirk. They made a container that could hold the nuclear explosion and powers of Godzilla once they had killed him. Because at this point, Godzilla had killed all of the kaiju in his path to become the king of the monsters. So there was no monsters that could hurt him. He even killed the scavengers because he was running out of food, being such a gigantic being with not a lot of gigantic things around him. So Godzilla died, his power got captured, and so the government decided they didn't want anybody to know what had happened. So they buried it deep underground in a bunker for nobody to find it. Skip 300 to 200 years, 16 years before the main series had started. Inko Midoriya and Hisashi Midoriya, they were going on an expedition with a bunch of people to a place where there was loads of radioactivity. Now, in this universe, Inko was a palaeontologist and Hisashi was an explorer. And this is 16 years before the main series. So, Inko, while still being pregnant with Izuku, would still want to go down and see what was happening. Now, in the expedition, there were 8 people. All for One had also heard about this radioactivity, and he wanted to see what it was, so he shapeshifted into another person. So while they were down there, they made a gigantic discovery: a closed off bunker that had rusted doors. Now Hisashi, having been able to breathe fire, burnt down the door as Inko would move small objects to find bulletproof glass hiding a canister. Now Hisashi would make Inko stay back as he would open the bulletproof glass to reveal the canister. Everyone in the group was amazed. That was until he pressed a button on it and it started blurring an alarm. It went, and a blinding light flashed from the canister as an explosive radioactive explosion went off. Hisashi jumped in front of Inko, having all of his skin melt off, and just being a pile of skeletons and bones. All of the crew died there except for Inko and All for One. All for One escaping with the many of his quirks, seeing that nobody was going to survive. Though Inko just survived by pulling objects towards her, but her stomach, where baby Izuku was, hit the full force of the explosion. Though, at the time, she didn't know it, but he had survived. There was a devastating explosion coming from the place where the explosion had gone off, and all the heroes, some of the top heroes, All Might, Endeavor, and all those sorts of people, they would come down to see skeletons of piles of people and they were lifting up debris until they came across Inko Midoriya. She was laying on the ground with debris on top of her, and she was screaming in pain. The heroes helped her up and took her to the hospital, where she was having a baby, though she was not planning to have it for another month or so. This was a weird occasion, as people thought that the child might have a quirk due to this fact of the radiation, or maybe it was radiation poisoning or something. So Inko was dying slowly from radiation poisoning, as Recovery Girl was kissing her every so often to stop the radiation poisoning so they could get the child out. And like that, Izuku Midoriya had been born. But Inko didn't want to keep living with like tanks and taking medicine every day because it wouldn't be really good to her life. So she gave the child to the heroes and then killed herself with the radiation poisoning. Now, before we go into when Deku was 4, we're gonna say some of his powers. Now, because he has atomic breath, he can breathe like pulses of nuclear energy from his mouth. But the force of it is so powerful, he gets pushed back like naval laser from Aoyama. And also his last hope ability, I'm going to call it the nuclear explosion. It's where he loses all of his nuclear force and pushes it out, burning and disintegrating and everything in his path. But it heavily damages him. So it's hard for him to do it. Now, none of the heroes could care for Izuku because they had hero work to do. So they gave him to a foster home. And over time, he would begin to love his foster people, thinking of them as his parents. But at the age of 1, he'd already accumulated his first power, atomic breath. So when he was 4, his friend Kachan quirk has finally developed. And he told Izuku that it was explosions. Now, Kachan doesn't really think of Izuku as much of a rival because atomic breath isn't really powerful right now. Versus somebody that's very agile and small. So he didn't really think of him as a rival, but he did have a kind of semi-powerful quirk, not as powerful as Bakugo's, but Bakugo didn't respect him as a rival, but didn't treat him as a nobody. So they kind of became friends. Well, as he was excluded from some stuff, but yeah, Kachan's quirk came. So Izuku told his foster parents that he wanted to go to the quirk doctor to see what his quirk was called and what he could do. Because he already knew he had atomic breath, but he could do other stuff. So he went to the quirk doctor, and the quirk doctor ran a synopsis and diagnostics and things like that of Izuku. But when he came back, he said, "I am sorry, but young Izuku here does not have a quirk." As Izuku would hear this, he would be dumbfounded. "I don't have a quirk?" As he'd then say to the doctor, "But I do, watch," as he would shoot an atomic breath at the ground, and then he would fly up instantly and hit the ceiling and hurt his back and fall back down, as his foster parents would carefully grab him, making sure he wouldn't hit the ground and hurt himself. I'm dumbfounded," said the doctor. "I didn't think there could be a power like that. I have never seen a quirkless person. I have never seen somebody with a pinky joint to have a power. But sorry, son, you don't have a quirk." And going through their minds, the foster parents would think, "What? Is he like some devil spawn or something?" And they'll get all these negative thoughts into their head until when they were going home, they decided that they didn't want Izuku anymore. So they would bring him to an orphanage and put him in the orphanage, where he'd meet loads of people. But him being quirkless, to them he was just a nobody, and he'd get bullied by people there. Though he would sometimes show them his power, but then they'd all screech at him and call him a devil and demon spawn and his nuclear power. So they'd run away and throw stuff at him and never talk to him and hide from him. until the age of 10, when, let's say, Shoto Aizawa would hear about a boy who had a power but was quirkless and couldn't control it that well because he would always get flung back. So he'd go to the orphanage and ask to take care of this boy. Now, Izuku, not knowing who Eraserhead was because he has been secluded in the orphanage and bullied for the past 6 years, would just think of him as another foster parent, and a thought would go to his head. Sooner or later, he's gonna think I'm a demon and either drop me back here or throw me to the forest. So he would tell, so as he was walking out, as Aizawa had adopted Izuku, he would tell Aizawa, "But why did you adopt me? I'm a devil spawn. I can't do anything. I'm quirkless. I have powers that shouldn't be given to me. I'm a demon. I shouldn't exist." As Aizawa would look down at Izuku and say, "So what?" Now, Izuku felt comforted by this statement because nobody had ever truly accepted him. His powers were so deadly and dangerous and atomic and nuclear that everybody thought of him as a pest and something that should be exterminated. Though at this point in his life, he was very famous for those two reasons. One, being a demon or devil spawn in the eyes of everybody and the media as well. And also being the fact that he was the survivor of the biggest explosion. Also enhancing the fact that he was a devil or a demon spawn. Now, his grandparents didn't want him either when he was young, because when they saw his power, they thought that their beautiful daughter or son had created a demon and they did not want him in their life. A reminder of them and how he was born and what happened to them and how they died. So, Izuku went back with Shoto Aizawa as he would get many stares from people in the crowds. He would look around and see people giving him death glares and shouting at him, "You monster, go away, go back home, we don't want a monster like you, go back to Tartarus or whatever hellhole you came from." As Shoto Aizawa would stare at the people making these comments and immediately he would shut them up by saying stuff to them that Izuku couldn't hear or didn't want to hear. So he would be trained by Aizawa to get his power underway, and so that he wouldn't be feared, that he wouldn't fear himself and other people wouldn't fear him, because he saw that this boy was having a troubling life and he wanted to help him out, to show him that life was good, to show him that he mattered in this world and so and things like that. So for the next 6 years, Izuku Midoriya would start his training with pro hero Eraserhead. Now, he would never refer to Eraserhead as his dad, but Izuku would look up to Eraserhead as a loving father figure. Now, being around Aizawa, Izuku would take on more of the personality and how he acted, being a bit more sleepy and lazier because of the fact that he would wake up early and do things in the morning to get stuff out the way earlier, like Shoto Aizawa would do. Now, because Aizawa was a UA teacher, he would bring Izuku to UA a lot of the time, where he would become friends for the past 6 years, and seeing people go and people come, as finally, when he was 16, he would finally get his turn as trying out at UA, his dream school, where his dad would teach. Izuku didn't really care for All Might, and more like most of the heroes at UA, thinking of them as saviors to him, and him wanting to become more like them and learn like them and do stuff like them. He was the ultimate fanboy. So Izuku would then Izuku would meet people like Miro at UA and see the downfalls and rises of other heroes. He would ultimately become strong, and he was also taught by some of the younger heroes there, and some of the best, to how to control his nuclear power. He would unlock his nuclear explosion power as well, making him a nuclear man, basically. He would become unstoppable, undefeatable. And then his day would finally come, where he got to try out at UA. By the teachers and Aizawa, he'd been named Nuclear Boy. He'd been named Nuclear by all the teachers because of his sheer power and nuclear force. His day of the entrance exam would finally come. Of course, Shoto Aizawa, not wanting Izuku to be laid back in any subject at all, would teach him how to do maths and stuff like that, and help him out with everything else, as well as the teachers helping out as well. So he would ace the test and do it in under 2 hours and 30 minutes. Now, while Present Mike was doing his speech about what they should do, Izuku was sleeping because he had already been debriefed on what was happening and what they should do. So one Present Mike was talking. A blue-haired boy named Ida would put his hand up and ask, "But sir, you're talking about 3. What? But sir, you're saying that there is 3, but there is 4 on our sheet of paper." And then he would turn to see Izuku sleeping and say, "And you, wake up this minute. UA doesn't accept lazy people like you, so I don't expect you to make an M. You better just leave." As Izuku would stay there snoring, as Ida would be told to sit back down and would be fuming in his seat. Now let's go to the entrance exam. So as Present Mike would be talking, the gates would open, as Aizawa had said not to wait behind and wait for him to say go. So Izuku would start running. Everybody would be laughing, thinking that he'd been disqualified. That was until Present Mike would shout, "Follow that kid. He knows what he's doing." A hero doesn't stop and wait for an answer to go. You go yourself. So Izuku was running in and destroying robots. Aizawa didn't really need to teach him the basics on how to have brute hand strength because he was more of a long-range attacker. So he would more than likely go to aim them from a safe distance. So he had taught them agility when he was facing long-range attackers or when somebody was trying to punch him. So Izuku would be bounding and running between robots, destroying one, and he had racked up a nice 50 hero points. That was until Nezu had decided to release the 0 pointer. Now, Izuku would be running away knowing that he had no chance of defeating this monster. He just didn't have that nuclear power left. He might subject himself to more nuclear heat if he wanted to beat that thing. But he thought for now that he didn't want to go through that pain that he needed to do to get that much power. So he decided to run away. That was until he heard screams from a certain girl, Ochako or Uraka. Now he did not know this girl because he did not fall. he had become more agile with his steps and observation process, so he would not fall as easily. So he would hear her, and Aizawa, he could hear him in his head saying, "Save everyone you have to. It doesn't matter if you get enough points. Being a hero isn't about getting the fame or the points. Look at me. I don't have fame. I just do what I have to do to make sure that everybody survives and everybody lives a happy life." As Izuku would hear these words in his head, he would think, "Dang it, I gotta save her. I have to." As he would run at the robot, everybody would be looking at him, thinking he was foolish. And then they would start running away, trying to get away from the robot. Izuku would jump at the robot, using his nuclear atomic breath to slice off its one of its arms. The 0-pointer would just gurgle as its arm fell to the ground, where Izuku would burn it to smithereens as he would burn the rock trapping Uraraka. He would pick up Ochaka Uraraka and take her to Recovery Girl. Recovery Girl, knowing who Izuku was because of his fame around UA and being called Nuclear for his power. She would see him and say, "Hello there, Izuku, darling," as Izuku would put down Uraraka, and Recovery Girl would say, "Oh my, what happened here?" As Izuku would explain what happened with the 0-pointer. Recovery Girl would respond with, "Well, Izuku, you have saved somebody's life. I must tell the people at UA. But they probably saw you, so there's no need for me to do that." So he would go back to his home. I would lie on the couch, where, as I would say, "Good job," and spelling it to him straight away before he even got the letter, "You made it into UA." Izuku, hearing this, wouldn't care because he'd expected as much. He would then go back to practicing his nuclear explosions. He'd then say to Aizawa, "Aizawa, can I do the nuclear bomb thing again?" As Aizawa would say, "What? Didn't you tell me you never wanted me to do that thing again 2 years ago when you tried to make your power more powerful?" "Yeah, but it did work. I am more powerful than I was before." And then Aizawa would respond with, "But that pain you went through, you probably wouldn't want to go through it again. I don't suggest you doing it." As Izuku would respond with, "But please." "Okay," said Aizawa, as he would then take Izuku to the doctors where he'd get nuclear shots, because that was the only safe space he could put it in a facility. Now, the government had wanted to look at Izuku, and by doing this and giving him nuclear shots, the government got their way to inspect him a bit afterwards to make sure that everything was okay, but really they were just testing blood samples to make multiple people like Izuku. Now, somewhere off far in the distance, underneath the water and the land, there was a rumble, as one of the only kaiju left in the world, the Godzillas killers, were emerging from the cave, fearing the amount of force seeping from Izuku. So, thank you for watching, and I'll probably post again on Tuesday.